fun to have something through there.
It's the oldest of the Fisher kids,
Yeah.
and they're all just great.
Wow, it's
I'm so happy and so blessed
oh gosh,
to see them.
Okay, it is after 2, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Maybe we'll just have some late arrivals. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to Mark Wieser for presenting for us today, and I will let him take it from here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so very much, and good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? I don't want to have to shout any louder than I have to. First of all, I need to give you an explanation of how this book ever came about. And of course, this is the story of J.B. Wieser and his American Dream, a 20th century German immigrant to Texas, which was a little different. I never intended to set out to write the biography of my dad. I just, that was the furthest thing from my mind. So it's kind of interesting how things come about. And my dad passed away at the beginning of my sophomore year at A&M, late October, and no indication that he'd been ill. He just had massive heart attack and died, and we were called home. So going home for Christmas, that first Christmas was different. It was the first time that we celebrated Christmas without our patriarch there. We used to gather around the piano and sing songs in both Germany and in English, and we'd always end with his favorite, which was Old Black Joe. And so we did that, and we had our last Christmas that we ever played or had the piano ever again. While I was home those holiday seasons, I thought, well, we knew he had a sister in Germany. We knew he had a brother in New York. We had no address for him, so we didn't know how to contact him. The fact is, I don't know how they contacted him to let him know that my dad had passed away. My brother handled that, but I did have his sister's address, and that was my Tante Anna. I don't know if you ever heard the dance song that they used to play on the local radio station, Tante Anna, and it's a neat polka. So I wrote a letter to my aunt. Oh. I don't know why this acts up every time. There we go. No, but it's not working in the remote. Okay. You recognize this? This is German script, and I put some letters out front when you came in for you to look at. It's I could write this. I taught myself how to write it. It's very sharp, very angular. Somehow my remote's not working.
Okay.
And now with the mouse, I can move it with the mouse, but I'd rather have this if I could. Now that's not working. This happens every time. Okay, we'll get that fixed in a minute. So I introduced myself to my aunt, and I wrote in the German script, and she answered. And that began 11 years of correspondence. And I didn't know who she was. She told me about her family. We exchanged letters, and we were excited that we had a contact with something. Okay, the mouse didn't work. I was able to now I'm advancing it, but I really want this to work. So I'm changing the mouse. Get by. Why? What's that? Thank you. I'm sorry about that. That's a little trick.
Him? No, he's not mine.
Can you not hear me?
Not very well. Okay.
Do you want to sit closer?
I may.
Okay.
What you wish for, Mark.
I'll try to talk a little louder. Is that better?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. So I started corresponding with his sister, or my Tante Anna. And in 1964, we decided to go to Europe. My oldest sister and my second oldest sister and my mother and I. spent 2 months in Germany, in Europe, and also to meet my aunt and her family. And in 1966, my aunt actually came to America to visit her brother in New York and came to Texas, and we showed her Texas, and I think the hemisphere was going on, and we did a lot of things, and it was kind of neat because her brother had always denied her to come to Texas, and he wouldn't have it. It was kind of sad, but anyway, throughout the 60s, I spent 2 Christmases with my aunt and my cousins in Germany. Started traveling back and forth a lot. In 1971, my aunt passed away. And so that basically ended the correspondence. And this has been now 11 years since my father had passed away. And 15 more years passed. And my older sister traveled to Europe a number of times. And she would visit my cousins. And 15 years later, in 1986, she brought home a stack of letters. There were 52 letters. And they were written in this German script that you see up on the screen, which I told you I can read and I can also write. And this was 1986, and I had no time to do anything with them. I said, that's nice, and I put them on the bottom drawer of my dresser, and they stayed there for the next 10 years. So in 1996, things had got a little bit better. I had a home computer, I had Word, and I said, okay, it's time to get these letters out and read them and decipher them and put them up on the screen. And I started doing that, and I discovered, oh my God, I know so much from the stories that he used to tell that fit in between these letters. So someday I want to have to put all this together. So I spent 1996 just translating all the letters, and I sent them to all the kids. Here are your dad's letters. In case my sisters, you hear your dad's letters and nephews and nieces. This is your grandfather's records. And I didn't get any response from anybody, but I didn't have time to write the story until 2006. So 46 years after I got these first letters, I started putting this thing together. And I thought, well, I can knock this out in a year's time. This is a no-brainer. Well, it started dragging down. It took me the next 8 years before I finally got it finished. And I wanted to give every nephew and niece a copy of JB and His American Dream on his 100th anniversary of his arrival in Galveston. So that's what this is all about. This is my dad. Very proper, very sharp dresser, starched collar, a Van Dyke, very distinguished looking. I think he would scare the heck out of anybody today if somebody dressed like that. The reason he came to America is because of this man. This is Vincent Wieser. And he grew up in my dad's village of Postcards in Baden, which is in Lower Germany. He lived the American dream. He was a multi-millionaire. He owned 7 flour mills. He owned banks. He owned part of a railroad. He had power companies that supplied Hamilton and Heiko with electricity. And so he came to Germany to see the village that he had grown up in. And this is 1910. My father is 22. He meets my father and says, come to America. My father says, no, I like it here. And this is the area where my dad grew up. You see a little town in the probably close to the center, a little bit to the left, called Postcards. One starts with a V. All V's in German are F's. All W's are V's. That's very confusing to everybody, but that's a little village. And to give you an idea how big that map is, from Postcards to the edge of the lake is 7 miles. So you have a lot of little villages, lots of farmland. Excuse me. Postcards is located in the southeast corner of Germany. You see Stuttgart there. The French borders on the west side there. You see Freiburg and Breslau, and you see Konstanz. My dad always said he was from Konstanz, which is on the lake, and it was a neat part of the country. This is the only photograph. It wasn't really a photograph. It was a postcard that was in among my father's things. And this was taken in front of an inn that my grandfather owned called Gasthaus und Rühren. That's really a beer. But there you see my father on the left side and his younger brother Ernst. And then my grandfather, my father and my grandfather did not get along at all. And then there's my grandmother. And then on the far right is Anna, Tante Anna, the sister that I wrote to. This was a photograph, again, not a photograph, but postcards. And I need to explain that my dad in his closet, a Kleiderschrank, had a stack of these postcards or photographs. And those were the only photographs he ever had. And I'm sure it was his photo album that he could take out and look back, and they were all postcard size. I don't know when this was taken, but he's smoking a cigarette. He's obviously in his parents' home. I wish I knew who those line drawings were on the wall. I don't think they were his father. I think they were perhaps his grandfather and grandmother. But you can see he was a very snappy dresser and was interested in that. The collection of postcards were quite interesting. There were a lot of them in color, and they were quite beautiful. And most of them had to deal with the lake, which we call the Bodensee. It's Lake Konstanz. It's a beautiful glacier lake. It's the headwaters of the Rhine. Just 20 miles to the north is the headwaters of the Danube. So it's a very interesting part of southwest Germany, but it's just beautiful. It's almost idyllic. And he enjoyed this region an awful lot. My dad used to tell me about the early Stone Age people that lived along the lake, and they built these little houses on top of stilts in the water. And I've actually visited those. I've been there, and they look just like that. So when I saw those, I remembered what he had told me. Almost every postcard deals with sailing. I didn't realize my dad was such a sailor, but he actually built a sailboat, which I never knew about until he had died. He loved sailing. And it was kind of interesting that I never got to go sailing with him. My dad also was in the German army. He was, this is before World War I. All young men had to be in the army. He was a private, very disciplined. He didn't like being in the army. He served his 2 years in the reserves, and then it interfered with his profession. He was a salesperson for, I'm going to show you in a minute where he worked, but it interfered with his advancement, he told us, because the Kaiser kept calling up the troops for practice, and he didn't like that at all. So this is the little town called Langenargen. It's on the west coast of Lake Konstanz. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. It's still there. And this is the factory called Bass and Keller. And this is the place where my dad worked. And he lived in that little two-story house that you see just off center to the right was his, where he had a room in the factory. And he liked working there. He took a lot of stationery to write letters home on. It was really neat because now I had all these letters when I got them that were written on the companies that he worked for. And there you can see that they made wine, vinegar, and spirits, and he liked using. You can see the illustrations of the factory. They also made apple juice. And so I guess maybe this is where my dad got acquired a taste for planting a lot of fruit trees. He wasn't exactly Johnny Appleseed, but he did plant lots of apple trees here, but he planted a whole lot more peaches. And he was interested in fruit. Again, another postcard with a sail, but this one is very interesting because among all the postcards that he had in his collection, it's the only one that is actually sent to him. And it's sent by a lady, a little Fräulein called Christina. And it's kind of forward to say that finding this sailboat car reminded me of you, and I just had to buy it. Can I buy you a glass of wine? And I said, whoa. Have no idea who Christina was. No idea whatsoever, except I know something went wrong. And what went wrong is she obviously dumped him, or somebody did along the way. So these are the things that your mom and dad, or especially your dad, never talks about. In 1910, we had Vincent visiting his hometown, and my dad writes a letter to his uncle Vincent, really his cousin Vincent, that says, buy me a ticket, I'm out of here. And he sends him a first-class ticket aboard the SS Brandenburg. And when you travel first class, you get your name in a little brochure like this. This is 1910. I couldn't find 1914 online. But when you're first class, you get your picture taken. And this is my dad sitting with the gloves on. Can you spot him? He's in the center. It looks like Lenin to me. These were all, I guess, German immigrants heading not to New York, but to Galveston. Galveston was one of the largest ports in the United States for immigrants to arrive at. They even built a special island out in the Pelican Bay to allow all the immigrants to disembark and go through. And my dad followed his uncle's instructions to grab the train. And this is actually a photograph in 1910 of the causeway between Galveston and the mainland. And so I know that's what it looked like at the time. Now my dad is heading to a place called Heiko. My dad tells a story that he almost missed getting off the train because the conductor kept saying Heiko, and he was expecting Hiko. The I in German is pronounced like an E, so he was listening Hiko, and it was Heiko. But he managed to get off in time, and his uncle went to his uncle's house, and his uncle made him write a postcard home that night. And it's kind of interesting because it's obvious that my dad speaks no English. His uncles or his cousin Vincent's daughters speak no German, so there's no communication. They think my dad is kind of strange and stuffy, wearing a frock coat and a top hat like Abraham Lincoln wore. And that hat was fantastic. So were the coat with the tails. I don't know how many high school plays they borrowed his coat and his top hat, and he could punch it, it would pop up. Unfortunately, my mother burned everything, and so I don't have those anymore. But what's interesting here is he says, we're going to head to Dublin, 22 miles. Dublin's 22 miles northwest of Heiko. His uncle has a mill there, and a son that's running it. Why it would take 7 hours to travel 22 miles is puzzling unless they were walking, and I can't imagine that to be the case. But this is a postcard that he wrote home, and I recovered this postcard when my sister brought all those letters home, and so things are beginning to fit into place. This is his cousin's home in Heiko. It sits on a block in the center of the block of the entire town. There's no other house on this block. He was really a multi-millionaire. My dad obviously got into the house, but one time, as my dad is living in the other town, in Dublin, he's never invited to the house. He's never invited to dinner. He gets put up in a shack or slave quarter. He has a one-room cabin that he's living in. He has to pay rent in it. He cooks his own meals. He's never invited into the family once. And so it's really a strange relationship. And my dad has only relationship with the man he calls his uncle. And this is where he's living. But he's sick and he's getting old. And after working basically shoveling coal for 6 months, and not getting welcomed by the family, says, I need to go to school and learn English. And so his uncle gives him money to go to San Antonio and go back to school. And there were postcards from San Antonio, and this is one of them. And you can see my dad didn't have a camera, so he bought postcards. You can see the Alamo grounds there. This is Commerce Street. About the time that he lived on Commerce Street, he took a room somewhere, and he collected some interesting postcards. And some of these would be definitely racist today. This is not a typical Mexican family in San Antonio, but he fortunately never mailed that to anybody. But it's in those cards, and it's in that stack. I thought, whoa. He finishes up, he masters English, and I have his books, I have his textbooks that show what he did, all his little lessons. He mastered English, and he went back to Heiko. His cousin has passed away. Now he gets a job as a bookkeeper in the company itself, and one of the sons is running it's called the Hamilton Mill and Elevator Company at this time. They have different names, but he doesn't stay there very long, and he sends a letter to LaSalle Extension University. LaSalle is still in business, and he actually goes to a local attorney and says, "Can I study the law books in your office?" And this is how people became lawyers in those days. They usually read the law books and then, of course, studied. But my dad also went to LaSalle, or did a correspondence school with LaSalle Extension University, and he actually wrote him a letter when he finished and got his degree. This is actually a real sheepskin, and it's really neat. It's currently at Texas A&M University in San Antonio that has all his letters and all his documents, but it was kind of neat when you got your degree from college and it's on a real sheepskin. And so he got his bachelor's of law, and he's starting to practice law in Hamilton. Unfortunately, it's 1917, and a month later, President Wilson takes America into war with Germany. And this is some of the posters that you can find that were out everywhere. And of course, I forgot to tell you that shortly after England and France went to war with Germany, they cut all the transatlantic cables. And so my father is unable to find out how his mother is doing, how his sister's doing, or how his brother's doing. And the images that he sees, he says, I don't recognize these. I don't recognize what they're saying about what the Germans are like. So it's kind of traumatic for him. But this is typical of the type of things that the Americans are seeing. And it's I don't know what you call it, propaganda, but it's kind of interesting. My father tells a story that things got, after the United States went to war, got a little difficult in towns like Hamilton and Heiko. Germans were being assaulted. There's a farmer in Bastrop that I know of that was so harassed he committed suicide. There was one German I know of that was murdered up in the Midwest. People just started turning on Germans, and if you spoke German, it was a crime in Texas. You couldn't speak German. It was outlawed. The Texas legislature said, you're not going to speak German, or we'll arrest you, which caused a big problem in Fredericksburg because everybody was still speaking German. Anyway, my dad hears about Fredericksburg, takes the train from Heiko to Austin to San Antonio and back up to Fredericksburg. And we actually had a railroad since 1912, the San Antonio, Fredericksburg, and Great Northern. And the first thing he does is he hangs out or runs an ad in the paper. Now, this is totally against Wilson's law. He could be arrested for this. He's not an American citizen. He had to be a resident for 5 years, and then you got before you can file as citizenship. And Wilson has decreed that all German aliens cannot work. So I don't know what they were supposed to do or how they were supposed to exist, but my dad says, the hell with that, I'm going to practice law because I'm a lawyer. And he runs his ad in the paper. And I found a lot of stuff in the newspapers. So I don't know if you ever heard of loyalty rangers, but the Texas legislature passed this particular act. It was House Bill number 15, and it was copied a lot of federal statutes, which basically said if you are opposed to the war, if you say anything derogative about the war or President Wilson, you are considered disloyal. You could be arrested. You could go to jail from 2 to 25 years. Now, to enforce that, they actually appointed Texas Rangers called Loyalty Rangers. Every county could appoint up to 3. And Gillespie County had a Loyalty Ranger, and his job was to look, listen, and watch and report. And there were 800 eventually in Texas. They actually tried to justify keeping Loyalty Rangers, but they finally did away with them in 1919. But then we had one. I know who he was, and they knew about my dad. And my dad loved pistols, and as a German alien, one is not allowed to have a pistol. And so the war is over, but they decide they're going to catch him. And so they asked my dad to show up at a corner, I don't know, it was a corner gas station or where it was, but he brought the pistol, and he's immediately arrested.
Oh, my God.
And he's tried, and if he's convicted, he will be deported, even though the war is over. And he would tell us this story. He always told us this happened in San Antonio. And when I was doing the research, I discovered it happened in Fredericksburg. It didn't happen in San Antonio. So I don't know why he embellished the story. But he was put on trial. He served as his own attorney, and he convinced the jury he was not guilty. And you know that's going to anger the other people in town. So anyway, those are the things that happened. There were other things going on in Texas, and right after World War I, there was a gigantic oil boom in Texas. Oil could be anywhere. You ever heard of Desdemona?
Mhm.
It sprang up overnight to 30,000 people. Desdemona is barely a railroad crossing today or a stop sign, but oil was everywhere and people went ballistic. I mean, they were trying everything. I don't know how they ever got this car unstuck, but you find dozens of photographs of people just going absolutely crazy. I mean, it was like the gold rush, and this was oil. Oil could be anywhere, and you've seen pictures of Beaumont that look like this. Well, there were ads being run in the local paper. The Fredericksburg Standard was running this. It says, look, you know, we're going to this. You send us $1, we'll put you on the list. There were a lot of scams going on. People were crazy about buying oil leases. And so my dad says, what the hell? I'm going to start buying up oil leases. You know, and he will resell them to the oil companies. And oil was just crazy. And this was another ad put in the local paper. Well, that was a boom to ride. I mean, it was fantastic. And my dad cleared $10,000 by buying oil leases and selling them to the oil companies. Now, you had 1 year to find the oil, so it wasn't a very long lease. And the farmers were happy to get their $10 or whatever they got paid. But what this did for my dad is he was out in the county. He had 50,000 acres tied up in land on Gillespie and Mason County, but he was talking to the people, farmers. And this is where he started developing his followings among farmers. So you could buy oil leases and sell them to the oil companies. The only problem is, guess where the oil was? Can you find Gillespie County? It's right in the middle, and a drop of oil in 100 miles.
Oh, I know.
So he made a killing. It was great. It was great for him.
So are you saying there was oil in Gillespie
No,
County?
not a drop.
Okay.
But he had the leases for a while. He sold it to the oil company. There must have been dozens of oil companies that sprang up. It was an oil boom, kind of like the gold rush. People just went crazy.
Yeah.
So he participated in that, and that was kind of neat. Then his uncle has passed away. His cousins say, come back to work for us. We need a foreign agent. And so they said, look, we know you speak German pretty good, but how about going to Cuba? And so he's going to represent flour in Cuba. And it's really crazy. They bought him a train ticket from Fredericksburg to St. Pete, what is the bottom of the Florida, all the way Key West, Florida. He goes by train. There's a big train wreck, our train derails, and he writes my mom. This is the only envelope and letter that survived. And I had seen all the letters that my dad had written to my mom. It was a nice bundle. She wrapped it up with ribbon. It was in her cedar chest, and she burned them. And really sad because how handy they would have come in. This was my mom at the time. She's 18. 18 was getting kind of old. She had known my dad since she was in 1917. My dad took a room at her mother's boarding house, and so they knew each other. She was one of 9 children. She had to start picking cotton when she was 6 years old. By the time she hit the 6th grade, she had to drop out of school. She loved education. She loved reading. She was basically self-educated. She never stopped reading. But she liked my dad. And my dad has seen the world. A number of years ago, when I was doing export for Fisher and Wieser, I got to get into Cuba from Panama when it was still totally illegal. And I visited all the hotels or where they were supposed to be, and I visited all the stops that my dad had visited. And this is the entrance to Havana Harbor. This is, I don't know, whoever drew the artwork for this guy forgot artistic basics, and that's the head of a body is 1/7 of the body. And that kid, I don't know how successful they were at selling. This was one of the brands called Our Baker. And a sack of flour was 48 pounds. That was the standard that they set. Obviously, I don't know if he sold flour to Cuba or not. I don't know. There are no records. I never could find out. And the companies back in Hamilton and Lampasas, all of those went bankrupt. So that nobody has any records. But this is what he was selling to the Cubans. He comes back and he runs ads. He runs ad on the front page of the Standard. Later on, the Radio Post comes along and he's running ads in that. And he's very aggressive about attracting business. This is his brother, Ernst.
Ooh,
He's his younger brother.
nice.
The war is over. He's very unhappy in Germany. He joins the socialists, the communists. He wants revolution. He wants change, anything but the Kaiser. My father has said, you need to get out of Germany. This is not good for you. Unfortunately, Germans are not allowed to immigrate. And if they do, they have to stay in countries like Mexico for 2 years before they're allowed to cross the border. And my uncle is very much in favor of socialism. And so I think my dad wants to get him out of there. They try to meet in Mexico, but it doesn't work out. My dad is now staying at the Hotel Cosmos. The nice thing about my dad is he's stealing stationery from all these hotels. And I had to make this one up because I couldn't find it on the stationery I could print at the time. But that is the Hotel Cosmos. I don't know whether it still exists or not. My dad comes back home and I realized that he's in the lending business.
Wow.
And he's loaning money at 3%. So he must have made a pile of money selling those oil leases. But he has an office in the Gold Building. The Gold Building is where Fredericksburg Fudge is located on Main Street. And it's upstairs our offices, and he has 2 office suites rented. So he must be doing pretty good, but he still doesn't want to get married because my mom keeps saying, wait till he's made some money. And he's made some money, but nothing happens. And so he's running ads like this. He's 3%, I've got money to lend. And then he gets called back into, now it's the Waco Mill and Elevator Company. And he's asked to go to Europe. And you can see who the presidents of the J.F. Wieser is, the secretary. And I don't know why Duncan is the president, but Vincent's kids weren't very smart in maintaining a business. But anyway, this is a passport photo that he had to make. He was still a German alien. Well, the war's over, but he was still not an American citizen. So he had to go to the Dutch embassy that could represent Germany and vouch that, yes, he was a German and get his passport. And this is his business card. He's moved up in the world. He now has his own little business card. European representative. I mean, wow. And he's going to go off to Europe. Well, in Europe, he lands in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. I know he travels to Denmark and Sweden. He obviously goes to Germany. He also visits Switzerland and Italy. So he's doing a lot of traveling. I don't know what he's selling, but my aunt finds out that he's there. He's coming back to see his mother. That would be an appropriate thing to do. And so my aunt Anna decides to push their wedding forward so he can be there. And I don't know what happens, but I can tell from the letters something happened with either his business deals, maybe he didn't make a sale. I don't know. But he leaves the day after the wedding. And that's the last time he sees his mother, the last time he sees his sister. He grabs a ticket aboard the New Amsterdam in November of 22. It arrives in New York, the New York harbors. He immediately heads over to Grand Central Station and he goes home because he's making money at 6%.
Twice.
And that's the last time he works for the Wiesers in Hampton. He's had enough of them. His interest turned local at this time. And you have to remember that Gillespie County had 44 country schools at this time. And school closings were huge. If you're going to run for office, that's where you go to be seen. And he starts attending these things like this one at Palo Alto. And everybody welcome, and people would show up and all the politicians would show up. And what he wants to do is he wants to run for county attorney. In November of 22, he loses. Not by much, but it's a big loss. And maybe not a bad setback. You come in second, but when there are only two in the running, it's not so good. But his name is getting out there. Well, my mother has had enough of this. It's now, she's 22, he's playing around the country, he's running for office, and basically she issues an ultimatum. Either we get married or this is over. And it's not over. And you could go to Stein Lumber Company and buy a kit for a house for $4,000 or less than that. And they built it, and this is still standing.
that
It's the bungalow.
Wow.
My niece lives in it now. She's added on to it. My grandmother lived in it for a while. My parents lived in it for 7 years. My brother lived in the house for 9 years. I lived in the house for 7 years. So we love this house. It's now on our ranch. This was 100 acres at the time. See, my dad had some horses. I think he's getting ready to plant some cotton. But this is where they take up residence. My dad also writes his brother, who's in Mexico, and says, come on over. My mom and dad had their first child. This is my brother. And of course, the first child is always the darling of the family. So there are lots of photographs of him. There aren't very many of me, but it gets old after 5. So anyway, he is a darling. This is Jarvis. And my uncle shows up. And my uncle is a party man. He wants to go dancing. And we have dozens of dance halls in Gillespie County. And so he's at all of them. And he's drinking and he's meeting friends that like to party. And this just is not fitting with my dad at all. It was very proper, very prim, and they have it out. And I wish I had the details of that conversation, but the end result is my uncle headed back to Mexico for safety, and he's out of the county, and my dad is relieved. There was another little episode that was taking place at this time. Gillespie County was in a cotton boom. Cotton was a big crop in Gillespie County until the bottom fell out of it. But people were buying cotton. And so my dad decides to build cotton himself, trying to raise cotton. This actually appeared in the local paper. This was in the Radio Post, which is a new newspaper of which my dad was an officer and helped get started. I can't imagine them running articles like this, but take a look at what that little 4-year-old picked in a year's time. My mother started picking cotton when she was 6. This is typical. I don't hope they earned a lot of money, but this has stunned me that this was still in the papers in the 1920s. Well, my dad must have been doing pretty good at the end of 1924. He's running an ad that says, "Merry Christmas to everybody." And so that's the only time he ever did that. So I think it was downhill after that. But my dad is also involved in lots of other organizations that I had never heard of before. The Fredericksburg Mutual Aid Fund Association. I guess it was kind of insurance. I should have done more research on this, but my dad is secretary. He said, "Well, okay, disability, look at the prices. If you die, you get $1 from every member. Isn't that generous?" I don't know how all of this worked. They have admission fee. I don't know what that would be. No medical examination. That's a big selling point. The annual dues are only $1. And again, if you die, you get $1 from everybody. A lot of money floating around, but it was kind of interesting. He also was a member of the Gillespie County Farmers Fire Association. And he's running a lot of ads. And then in 1926, he organizes the Gillespie County Title and Realty Company, of which he is the only employee. It stays in business until, until my brother died, 86. You know what a title company does?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you just go to the title company and whatever you buy, they approve. Well, in those days, you had to read the deeds. And of course, Moisenbach owned everything in the county. He bought it all in his name. So when you bought a piece of property, you had to go read the original deed that Moisenbach transferred it to these people, who transferred it to this people, the same meets and bounds and measurements until it got down to you. I love doing this kind of work. Abstracts used to be this thick. You got a copy of every abstract from the beginning. It was like a family tree. Now they don't do that anymore. And you know, the title comes and says, "Well, vouch for it." But they better be doing their research. Somebody better check out all those titles, because I discovered when I was doing abstracts that if they misspelled a word and it was recorded in the courthouse, you had to misspell it as well. You couldn't put SIC after it. You had to copy just the way it was. So I used to do that kind of work for my brother. At least I helped. I never got paid for it. But it was a lot of fun to do. And it's really sad that that's not happening anymore. And then this ad appears in the Radio Post, also appeared in the Standard. Cotton prices had just absolutely collapsed. And the people who loaned money to the cotton growers, I tell this part of the story a lot because it's so important to us. You could go borrow money from the feed company and charge your groceries. I know you remember Werner Warehouse?
Oh, yeah.
They used to have a grocery, and you bought your fertilizer, your feed, your seed, you charged everything, and then you sold your cotton or your wheat or whatever wool at the end of the year, and they credited your account, and you got whatever was left. Well, this was a mass meeting. And mass meetings are kind of interesting. It's the only time I ever saw it happen. They put big block letters, mass meeting, cotton growers show up. Well, this catches everybody's attention, and it catches my dad's attention. So he thought he'd go. And when you go to a meeting, you might get elected an officer. Now, he's not a cotton grower, but he's there, and they elect him secretary. And then they ask all the officers, "Hey, tell us how you're going to pay us back next year." And the president gets up and says, "Well, I thought raising," and those are white hogs that he would be raising, and he'd raise some leghorn chickens, and his farm would look like he was raising cotton. He actually said that. And my dad actually said that too. And I said, "Who knew? Dairying? I didn't know he knew which end of the cow to milk." But fruit growing and canning, he mentions that. And of course, when you go out on a limb like that, kind of have to put up or shut up. But I remember this as you know what this is?
A Xerox machine.
Oh, it's
Before
a
it was a
media
Xerox.
machine.
Yeah,
I was still using those when I was teaching. I had to do all my tests on it.
didn't have purple ink, didn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I actually found this machine in the workshop. I actually played with this thing. So I recognized this. They were, and my mother told me this, they printed letters, copied them and mailed them to all the farmers, start growing fruit trees. And by 1930, it's 1935, 36, this is 39, they actually printed the names of all the people actively growing peaches, and the ones with the stars were members. So you have a lot of people growing peaches that don't have members. None of those families are growing stuff, except maybe Alvin Krimo's family. I'm not sure his son still has the stand on the west end of Main Street. All the rest of them, except the little Wieser guy down in the left corner. My dad planted 400 peach trees, because when you say something like that, you got to do it. And my dad had a funny philosophy about peach trees. He's kind of like raising kids. They knew what to do. So he planted a tree. He never pruned. He never sprayed. He didn't have a tractor. He didn't have a pickup. He didn't do fertilizer. He didn't do anything. That tree was going to survive on its own. Well, they were planted in 1928, and in 1954, I was still picking peaches off of them. But they were old and decrepit and falling apart. But these trees just last about 14 years. And then you really have to do some mercy killing and get rid of them, because they just fall apart. It's really, really sad. But anyway, that's how the peach industry got started. Meanwhile, my dad is still loaning money, and he does this for the rest of his life. It's just amazing. And he decides it's time for him to run for office again. And he doesn't do any better this time. Walter Petch beats him, but he wants to serve the county. And he does treat public office as a service. You need to serve. That don't make a lifelong profession out of it, but do serve your community. So he loses, and he just gets on a business trip. He has an assignment to go to New York and to Philadelphia. And so along the way, he's writing my mom postcards. And I don't know how he got these postcards, put them in his stack, in his Kleiderschrank, because my mother destroyed all the other correspondence. And his letters are kind of lovey-dovey. Drove 500 miles today, hope to make Washington, hope you're well, bye. He was different. This is 1930. He visits Fredericksburg, Virginia, writes, he says, I'm in Fredericksburg, heading on to Washington, see ya. Sends a nice photograph of the George Washington Bridge, I believe this is one this is. Yeah. In New York today, have a reunion. Bye, start home tomorrow. See that little asterisk? Guess who's the reunion with? His brother. Hasn't seen him since he kicked him out of Texas back in the 20s. He visits with his brothers for 20 minutes. They obviously don't get along. They won't see each other again for the next 26 years. But my dad's disappointed. But my uncle's been in the States. He still has a heavy German accent. He hasn't, he's speaking English with a broken German accent. He hasn't improved himself. He doesn't believe in learning English properly. And my dad is just disgusted. And it's kind of sad, and he drives home. Strange is that coming home was news. It doesn't appear in the Radio Post. I guess driving from New York City or to New York City in a car in those days was newsworthy. I mean, you could hardly go to Atlanta without a blowout, and you never left the house without a tire pump. Tires were just not that dependable, but I mean, this was award-winning, and this made newspaper room. Well, in 1930, my dad bought this building on Main Street. For 50 years, it was known as the Wieser building. My sisters and I actually restored it in 1972. It was the second building on Main Street that was ever restored. And we got put apartments up front, but this is where they live. He bought this and moved to town. I remember they're living on a ranch, and their little kids are growing older, and they're going to go to country school, and my dad won't hear of it. So he moves to town. And Jarvis, my brother, is just 5 years old, but he can go to Catholic school, which is just across the street. So that's why they moved to town. I've never understood that, building a bungalow, brand new house in the county, knowing that maybe you'd have kids and knowing you'd have to come to town. So I don't think they thought that through very carefully. Well, my dad decides, to run for county attorney again. And he's running ahead, so, promises to do his duty. That's what when you take an oath,
About that house, is that on the corner across from the German restaurant?
this building?
No, yes, is
You know
that,
where Knopf and Metzger's used to be?
pardon me?
Knopf and Metzger's? Do you remember that?
Yes, that
Across
right
the-
across the
Yeah.
street?
On the south side.
Yes,
That's looking north.
I recognize the porch up there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
I had fun restoring that
Kind of
building.
grounds you, doesn't it, when you know exactly where it is?
If you notice on the roof, way at the top on
Yes,
the
yes.
right-hand corner, you see a little dome.
Yeah, yeah.
I still have those. I never put them back. Well, anyway, when you restore a building, everybody wants it then, and my sisters wanted to sell. And so I didn't want to stand in the way, so we sold it. I wish we hadn't. I think we sold it for $262,000, which was a lot of money.
Yeah.
The last time it changed hands, it was 2.7 billion. Anyway, my dad had an interesting philosophy about real estate. He never looked back on the profit. So he was buying and selling the land all the time. Oh, great.
There you go.
Okay. So my dad decides to run for county attorney. Third time's charm. And he wins.
Oh,
Not many people seem to vote in those states. The candidate, 53%, was kind of a flip. He turned the corner. So he's becoming more well-known. He's becoming more popular. What did I do here to get this mixed up? This was the second time. Oh, this is re-election. He wins even bigger, this time against Arthur Staling. Arthur Staling was a local attorney. They were rivals, but Arthur Staling is elected county attorneys to follow my dad. And when my dad becomes county judge, the New Deal is happening. The National Recovery Administration is taking place. That affects Fredericksburg. Fredericksburg, like Gillespie County, is in the depression, like everything else. Dollars are short. And of course, all the banks fail. Look at all the bank failures.
wow.
And it was getting worse. And so the government was having to step in. And we had two banks in Gillespie County, or Fredericksburg at that time, I guess Gillespie County. The Citizens Bank was not ever incorporated. And when a bank goes under, the courts get involved. And the courts appointed lawyers to supervise what was happening in the bank. And this really upset my father. J.D. Herster and H.H. Saugaville became attorneys, and they're collecting salaries that are astronomical for 1933. I don't know why I did $2,011. I've done this a long time ago. It's $19,000, which is pretty heavy tax, but there are two banks, and this is the other one. And the same people are I don't know whether he was upset that he was not getting a share, but he's upset that the people's money is going for attorney's fees, and they're not working in the bank. They're just supervising things. And he's so mad, he writes a huge article that's published in the paper. I mean, he's really upset about it, and he spells it out. And you can read through that. He says, "Why is this going on?
Wow.
Who's looking out for the depositors, basically?" And so it goes on. Let me find my place here. Well, this causes such a county uproar, they decide to have a second mass meeting. This time that was instigated by my dad. And the committee is organized to economize the receivership, to, pay more attention. And it's well attended as well. So these were headlines from the paper. Well, one of the investors, one of the attorneys is Mr. Petch. And Mr. Petch and my dad have a very interesting relationship. They're always at odds with each other, but I think they kind of respect each other. Mr. Petch is the state representative, and he's a Democrat representing Gillespie County. And he writes back in his own paper, he says, there's a reason why Mr. J.B. Wieser is so upset about this. How much did he get? He doesn't prove how much he got. He said, what did he get? And it leaves this question out there. Did my dad draw a salary? Well, I don't know. But this ad appears the day before the election for county judge. And there are 5 people running for it. And my dad polls the most votes. It looks like he's pulling 1 million votes up, but that's too close together. It's a 1,136. And the next runner-up has 890 votes. So there are 5 people running for judgeships, and he's finally elected county attorney. And he's so proud. He has his name on stationery, and he writes his mom on this letter. And I had the original that he wrote, and it was in all those papers that came back to me. And so Petch kind of does 2 things. He's state representative, and he has the same goal my dad has. And one of the top priority of my dad's administration was to get the roads paved. You could not drive from San Antonio and Fredericksburg and back in a single day. You're going to have a blowout. It's dusty. It's slow. You're worn out by the time you get here. Imagine dirt roads. If you want to have some fun, go out the old San Antonio Highway and follow that all the way to Bernie. And imagine if it was still dirt and low water crossings. And you were lucky to do that. Paving roads becomes the single most important objective of my father, is to get the roads paved. And it becomes an issue that everybody believes in, including including Mr. Petch. And he's writing letters to his readers to say, hey, you need to listen to this guy, this county judge, because we do need to pave the roads. So what's holding things up? Well, what's holding things up is that some people don't want to sell right away. And you got to expand a road. Highway 87 didn't exist. That was the old Comfort Road. And if you go out the old San Antonio Road, that was highway number 9. And they decided to build a new road. They want to call it Highway 87, which is an extension that comes from the Canadian border, if you ever followed it. But you couldn't get the right-of-ways. And unless people agreed to widen their corners, so you could make a curve. If you're on the Kerbal, you know Dead Man's Curve. I don't know how many dozen people have gotten killed there. Llano Highway going to Llano has some dangerous curves as well. You can imagine what the curves were like in those days. Well, cars are going faster. If you pave the roads, they're going to go still faster. And sharp corners are dangerous. And so the county has to buy the right-of-way. That's what the state requires. And if you're keeping up with the people that want to build a bypass right now, the county has to pay all that right-of-way. You can imagine how expensive real estate has gotten in Gillespie County. So folks, it ain't going to happen to the south of Fredericksburg. It's just between here and the Pedernales. It's just not going to happen. But the county, if somebody refuses to sell, then you got a corner that it becomes impossible in the state. We're not doing anything. So Highway 16 was where the route from Llano to Kerrville was the one that was causing the most problem. And I think there were 14 landowners that refused to sell. And what do you do when a landowner doesn't sell? Well, you take it away from them. It's called the eminent process of eminent domain.
Sure.
And Mr. Petch is urging that the state do that. You got to have the right of way. You got to take it. You pay the owners a fair market value for their property. You don't steal it, but at least you force the issue. My dad is not afraid to force the issue. And so they do that. Agreements are reached. The roads eventually get paved, but there are a lot of hard feelings. People are going to have long memories, especially the landowners that were forced to sell their corners. And it's interesting. This little note I found in the way. Did you know you could get drafted for working on the highway? If you were an able-bodied male in the 30s, you could still be drafted to work on a county road. Whether they drafted you for 2 weeks, I don't know.
When,
But
it wasn't a depression or anything, they were just working.
Yeah, I mean, you had to serve. And the option they had here was to do away with it. Let's abolish it. No, we're going to keep that. We may need those boys. Well, the second issue that faced my dad is there was the WPA, Works Progress Administration. It was a new deal. The Washington was throwing money to the counties.
WPA.
And they said, hey, how would you like a new courthouse? And some people said, good, we'll add on to that beautiful courthouse created by Alfred Giles. And we'll add on to it. And the government said, no, you got to tear it down, or at least not touch it. And that's why we have another courthouse on Main Street. Anyway, my dad was pioneering this. I would have disagreed with him for a new courthouse, in a fireproof vault in case the courthouse burns. The city records burned, and they lost all their early records.
That's sad.
Soldiers at Fort Martin Scott set fire to one of the bars, and why they were
Yes.
keeping the city records in the bar, I don't know. But there we go. I'm sorry. Mr. Patch is praising my dad. Hallelujah, we got somebody moving ahead and doing this, and it's good service. We need these things. So he's trying to drum up support for this. The courage that the commissioners are building the roads and doing what's necessary.
Oh.
And building a courthouse now. My dad is empowered to seek the money from the Works Project
Right.
Administration. And
Right.
it all happens in 1939, but in 1936 is when it got started. And of course, that's the Texas Centennial. And it's great. I mean, the whole town is crazy. The Historical Society builds a replica of Reinskegel on Market Square. They actually are posting and canceling letters. And so my dad writes a letter to his mother. And that I recovered in those letters that came back. And that's Maria was her name. They stamped it with a Texas Centennial stamp. That may still be in our museum. I don't know. They were living in Tuttlingen, Germany. Well, they're going to have a great year dedicating things in town. And my dad is asked to do the official welcome. They release and open up the Reinskegel. My dad actually got the funding for this monument in front. And then they invite a former rep from New Braunfels to give the main talk on the outstanding characteristics of the German people. And it's kind of interesting that my dad was from Germany, that they didn't ask him, but he was used to that by this time. They're finishing the highway. 87 finally gets the go-ahead. So these were all headline news. And my dad decides to run for re-election. I mean, if you got the job, you want approval to see if you can do it again. And building those roads was something that could have caused trouble. And there was a low voter turnout. Remember last year's ice storm?
Mm-hmm.
This hits the day before election day. You couldn't vote absentee. You couldn't vote early. And a lot of people in the rural areas just simply didn't get out to vote.
Right.
And so my dad loses re-election by 135 votes. He was really disappointed in that, but he had a good philosophy about it. It's what people want, Believe it or not, his adversary, Colonel Petch, was shocked. He said some of the best people were defeated at the polls the other day.
Mm.
And the next week he writes another one. Said this court, my dad's court, they were builders. they were patriotic. That was pretty bold on his part. It was really pretty honorable, I think, for two people that really never got along. Anyway, there's things to finish one's term up with, and my dad is involved in the dedication of the agriculture building. You remember that? It used to sit on Market Square, Courthouse Square. We tore it down. It was getting old, falling apart. But he got that building, and he made a speech, or at least he was given the keys to it. So I guess that's kind of neat. Meanwhile, my grandmother is living under Nazi Germany, and they can't communicate too much. Aren't many letters. She's growing old. This is tending the garden in back of my aunt's home. I never met her. She died, I think, a year before I was born. But she had a sad life, really a sad life. And I know my dad loved her very much. But to attend a wedding and then leave and never come back, it's just amazing. My dad decides to run for a state representative. And guess who his opponent is? Colonel Petch. And he's asking for his advertising in Petch's newspaper. And interesting things that Petch now does. He's defending his term, and he says, "Don't you ask how come Judge Wieser got defeated? Don't you ask him why did he lose?" And my dad had a perfect answer for this, and I remember him telling us this story. He says, "Well, simple. I didn't get enough votes." Anyway, this I saw in the San Angelo paper. Old Representative Petch may have a little trouble because Gillespie County is being noted as a Republican county. And, how will they turn out? This is in the Abilene Avalanche Journal. I found it during research when I was writing this book. The vote is really very, very close. I want you to pay real close attention to the total vote of Llano County. It's only 618, and look how many in Gillespie County. Gillespie County is the most populous. So, meanwhile, peaches are getting statewide publicity at Stephenville. We won first place. Stephenville is another area where they grow a lot of peaches in Texas. And so peaches are getting a name. Some of the peach growers that are named there, you see the Hodges and Canazes.
Look at all the Canazes. Wow.
Meanwhile, in New York, his brother is attending the Nazi rallies. This is at Madison Square Garden. Huge rally, the pro and row. Can't quite read that anymore at the bottom. This was a huge event. And my uncle would get up early morning of the hours. He had a shortwave radio, and he would tune in Hitler's broadcasts and speeches. He was enamored with Nazis. Well, this is what my dad looked like about this time, and he's aged a little bit. The goatee is gone, hair is getting gray. Not quite the flashy dresser that he used to be. And he announces he's going to run again for state representative. Petch isn't running this time. I don't know exactly why, but these are the issues. Old age pension. I have no idea what the old age
priority
pension
list.
was.
Look at the priority.
I know.
Next is hunting and fishing.
Believe it or not, hunting and fishing laws were hotly debated.
Yes.
I don't know whether we had a bunch of poachers in the county, but that was a big campaign issue. And of course, the school laws, they were always a mess, but the bottom one, a truck could haul only 7,000 pounds. And that's back in the news today, with the big Mack trucks hitting small cars and the number of people being killed. But that was a big issue, and people were
Same mess of the school laws. No improvement.
No. Then an attorney in Llano by the name of Lawrence L. Gould. It's a funny name because my middle name is Gould, B-U-H-L, after my grandmother, but this was Brule. And he announces to run for state representative, and Petch jumps on that And he supports him. He says, by God, we'll have somebody who can speak English in the legislature. That's important. Somebody you can reason with, and somebody that can cooperate with other people. Talk about 3 direct attacks. Well, my father reads this and he responds to the colonel's reply. It runs pages in the newspaper. He is hot and heavy. And he reveals something that I didn't know before. He says, Petch, I don't know if it's true or not, came to my office when I took office and said, I'm going to tell you how to run this county. And my dad didn't let anybody tell him how to run the county. So little bits of things can get revealed that are never recorded in history anywhere else. Anyway, my dad carries Gillespie County by 600 votes.
Yeah.
And he uses,
Appreciate
do I
it.
have the vote somewhere? I thought I did. Llano County produces 1,000 more
Yeah.
votes for Mr. Brule than
Oh, dear.
actually existed. I know they stuffed the ballot box. Llano County didn't have that many. Anyway, my dad is a gracious loser. He says, thank you. When you lost a race, he said, thank you to all the people that supported you. It's just the proper thing to do. Meanwhile, World War II is starting. Are you old enough to remember these? I used to play with gobs of these little ration coupons. You couldn't buy anything without these.
That's right.
I don't know how you got issued these. I think you had to go line up and give you a quota. You had to buy gasoline with them. Yeah, these were points. Everything was rationed. Sugar was rationed. And so obviously my mom couldn't cook as much preserves, depending on the size of your family. It's interesting.
What was the tire inspection? What, every 60 days, what was that?
You know, I should have known. I don't know. I honestly don't know.
I mean, and did they all go to some place?
Tires
or-
were rationed. I don't know why they expect. I should have done that. That's my fault. I honestly don't know. But it's interesting. I shouldn't have left it up there. That's the question. 35-mile-an-hour speed limit. Remember when Nixon reduced the speed limit to 55? Can you imagine going to 35?
Oh, look at
My
that.
dad didn't have many photos made. Yeah, I'm just trying to back up here. I'm missing a
That
photograph
blonde hair.
that I hope will show up. My brother is in the service. This type of photograph is extremely rare, that a photograph was taken of everybody. That's me being held by my mom. So I did get a photograph taken every once in a while. Headline news in the paper is that we're going to have 30,000 bushels, and copy that right, Ethan, 30,000 bushels in Gillespie County. That is an enormous amount of peaches. Are you all familiar with Albertans?
Yes.
About hail.
Yes,
Hail was a big peach.
yes.
How about a Frank? A Frank was a late summer cling. It was a totally different strain from the Alberta strains that were too bad. It was yellow, it was a clingstone, and they were perfect for canning. There's
What is the brand now? I mean, what is now the most
We have,
frequent?
I should know this. We've got close to 20 different varieties of
Oh,
peaches.
Don't even try.
Alberta is
amazing.
not one of the,
That's
I grow Albertas, but they're not one of the big ones anymore. Red skin is
Yeah,
big.
red, yeah.
Early peaches, when I
Yeah.
first started growing peaches, getting a red peach in May was impossible. They're all yellow
Yeah.
skinned. And now we've got all red skins. And the whole season has moved forward
The
to be
seedless.
first on the market. This was a photograph my dad had taken just as my brother is being inducted. The
That's
entire
you.
junior and senior class at A&M was drafted overnight. And they had to go, and they were all officer training corps. So he was being sent. My dad knew that probably if he sent
And you're right now.
overseas. So he decided to have this picture made. It's the only family photograph we really ever had made. I remember this exact moment. I remember asking my mom if it's okay if I could put my arm on that wrist. Everybody else, if you notice, is standing at attention. They're scared. Nobody's smiling. And it's sad. And my dad is extremely concerned. My mom's dress was blue, by the way. I remember that dress. My sister, my oldest sister's dress is made out of a suit that belonged to my brother. Am I running out of time?
I don't know.
I don't know either. My dad was a reader of the Saturday Evening Post. Every week it came in the mail, and he would lay on his bed and he'd read. And because of the estrangement that he had with his brother, who was a master craftsman, when this cover appeared, he never knew that his brother was building the optics for every American submarine. Kind of ironic. I came across this and thought, oh my God, he never knew. And it's really sad. The OPA, the Office of Price Administration, was regulating everything. They set the price for peaches. Everything was regulated during the war. It was really, really interesting period. I don't know whether we'd be that conducive to that anymore. And guess what? They still haven't decided how to do with those banks. They're still in receivership. And it's now, what are we at? 20, 33, 12 years later, and they still haven't decided on the bank issues. I think my dad had given up by that time. My dad was more interested in planting trees. This is our home. Actually, this is my home today. I live in this house. I was born. This sits next to the peach house. You can see all the apple trees in the backyard. Those are all apples. The entire north end is apples. You can't see the peach trees. They're pear trees. I grew up on this place and I just love this place. But he liked it too. And very seldom we made anything newsworthy, but my brother is home from the war and he's about to go into law school. And so that made the paper that I found. So newspapers try to keep up with what all the kids are doing and where they are. He's about to enter law school. I really never knew my brother until I was 10 because I was too young. He left for college the month I was born, and not 10 years before he came back. The proudest moment of my dad was when my brother graduated law school and came home to join my dad.
Oh my.
And the reason why he was so happy with that is because Petch and his son didn't get along. Well, for lawyers, and they wouldn't practice. Arthur Staling and his son didn't get along. So he was happy about this. He told me that. And anyway, they had for the next 10 years, they'll practice law together. The 50s were interesting. We got television in the early 50s. You remember these programs?
Oh, yeah.
You know the guy on the left?
Didn't tell me.
Yeah, and you. Little Frenchman had a 30-minute special. They don't do TV shows like that anymore.
No, they don't.
Loretta Young was neat. We watched that. Death Valley Days. You know who emceed that?
Yes.
Yeah. Good old Ronald Reagan, and then
Oh.
Jackie
gosh,
Gleason,
yeah.
of course. But my dad's big interest, beginning in 1950, is Arkansas. And the license plates even spelled it out, land of opportunity. And he had two friends that moved to Arkansas in the late 40s. One was Hugo Sadler from Doss, and the other one was Charlie Kirchner. And they bought thousands of acres in the Ozarks. And he said, you got to get in on this. And so my dad did. And he bought 5,500 acres
Look at
in
that.
the Ozarks. And in 1950, we go up to visit the Ozark Mountains, part of the Boston Mountains around Jasper, Arkansas. This is the Progressive Courthouse in Jasper. This was like going back 50 years in history. It was unbelievable. All the roads were dirt. The courthouse hasn't changed. It still looks like that. My dad has given up fancy uniforms. He's at ease. He's comfortable. He's wearing his pajama top that my oldest sister gave him. He's wearing boots. He doesn't care. He wears his undershirt like that.
Well, he's earned all of that. He's earned that
And
right
he
to dress.
could care less. but he fell in love with Arkansas. We went up for the next 10 years, every year, sometimes more than once. And this is at the bottom of one of his land. This is actually Smith Creek that you see running below it. This is beautiful country. I think it reminds him of Germany. And like I say, in 1950, it was like stepping back into the 30s or the 20s. We met people that had never been to a town. They lived on their little lawn. They sat on they sat in their rocking chairs on their front porch by 9 o'clock every morning. They were real hillbillies. It was unbelievable. We camped one time next to a still 50 yards away and never knew it. He told us years later when we got out of the pen how close we had been. Moonshining is big, but he loves this area. This is the last 1,240 acres of all the land he owned. Today it is set aside because as the Smith Creek Nature Preserve, and running through it is Smith Creek, and it has on it the 4th largest cave in Arkansas. And we crawled into that cave, and we had a goose walk before we could stand up. We took lanterns with us. I remember one time we had 11 lanterns between us, and after we broke 4, we thought we better get out of there before we go any deeper. It had everything, icicles, stalactites, it had all that. It's also the home of the Mexican free-tailed bat. So today, nobody can go into it. It's totally reserved. Smith Creek is a beautiful valley. It's gorgeous. I can see why my dad loved it. It reminded him of land at home, but it's safe, and that was something he always wanted to do. This is one of the waterfalls along Smith Creek. They're not big, they're not gigantic, but they're neat just to see. We walked everywhere. We did the same thing. My dad loved to hike. In 57, my dad decided it was time to do something with his youngest son. And he never took me fishing. He never took me hunting. He never did anything that most fathers do with sons. But that summer, he's going to take me to Arkansas. And this was the camper he had built in 1950. And you can see that it was just cattle panels. And in the 50s, you could buy this screen that looked like it was encased in water, but it was plastic. And he built a regular roof on it out of roofing tin. And that's how we went to Arkansas in the 50s. And that same truck made, I don't know how many trips. My dad used to put a board across the top at the back, and he slid in a box spring, not a box spring, a set of springs, and he put his mattress on top, and he slept in that. All the rest of us slept out to sleep in cots. But you see the old Scotch water cooler? I don't know how many trips that made. The man sitting on the ground is Charlie Kirchner from Dawes. He's got thousands of acres. He was a bachelor, he never married. He would spend his entire life clearing property and making fields. And we went up there the first time, you could hear chainsaws going left and right. They were felling all the trees. And I even built a campfire for that. I actually painted this painting, this picture, I actually painted it. But that's the only photograph that I have of our trip. But it was a chance for me to have a one-on-one with my dad. And we discussed a lot. My dad was getting old. We didn't climb as many hills that year. And we went north from the Ozarks to Pea Ridge Battlegrounds. And we took time to walk the grounds and take the sights. On a Sunday afternoon, I'm sorry about this photograph, but I could not find a photograph that captured the things we watched that afternoon. We were at the Lake of the Cherokees or something like that in northeastern Oklahoma, and we had a peninsula where we were camping, doing our cooking, and in the afternoon the skiers came out, and there was a ski ramp like this, and my dad just enjoyed. We watched him for hours just jumping the skis, and at the time I didn't know he had built a sailboat. I didn't know that I knew we had land at Lake Buchanan, but when the war started, you couldn't get gas to visit it. And so the sailboat that he had built rotted because they couldn't get over to protect it. I still have the boom, and I have the paddles that he made, and I have the rudder. And so I never got to see that, but then I began to realize his appreciation for sailing and for water. Well, my dad and my brother and his wife made one more trip in 1960. Everybody got their chance. My sister and her husband got to go.
Yeah.
The only one that got out of going was my youngest sister, Bernice. She's older than I am, and she was the youngest sister. And I don't know how she managed to talk her way out of it. She's not going to go to Arkansas. On October 20th, my dad went to work and complained of aches and pains, and I don't know why he didn't go to the hospital. I don't know why somebody like my brother working in the next office didn't say, let's go to the hospital, let's go see a doctor. But he went home first to complain to my mother. And my mother called my brother who lived out on the ranch and said, oh, we better go to the doctor. And he dies at the hospital. His brother probably had the biggest triumphs of his life the following year. And my dad knew nothing of what my uncle saw. My uncle, what his brother was capable of doing. He was a master engineer. He invented things, and I should have brought one of the inventions he brought. He was a mastermind at that. The year after my dad's death, his company gets the contract to put motion picture projectors in TWA airliners owned by Howard Hughes. And what that took was to take a projector like this and flattened it. The reels were 3 feet in diameter to fit in that thing so they could show motion pictures. I know they were 3 feet because I found an article in the New York Times where 2 people were carrying them on board and described them and how the wind blew them off the ramp. They were bulky, they were difficult to get into place, and the next year, television came along, and the whole thing was over. So my uncle led a very sad life. And sometimes I think you create your own sad life. He always felt like it was somebody else's fault. And he didn't have that drive my dad did. It was kind of sad. But he died a month after my mom did. This is Tatiana, the lady, my aunt that I corresponded with for 10 years, 11 years. She passed away in 71. Anna finally, got to travel the United States. We even took her to Monterrey, Mexico, at the La Louisiane restaurant to celebrate her birthday. I think she appreciated that trip. My mother passed away in '83. She lived in the house for the rest of her life. All her friends would say, you gotta move to town. I mean, it's only a mile out of town on the edge. So she stayed. I don't know what happened to the S there, but this is my brother. My brother played bridge. Every week, a doctor sat across the table. There were master bridge players. I couldn't play with him. He was so sharp at cards. He could just tell where everything was located. Some people had minds like that.
Yeah.
He sat across the table from his best friend, a doctor, all the years for years that he had symptoms of prostate cancer and never said a word.
Oh.
But it was too late.
Oh, goodness.
So he died. My oldest sister taught
Yeah.
at 3 universities. She wanted to teach. That was her profession, and she loved it. She passed away a few years ago. This is my oldest living sister, who's currently in the hospital. She's also a teacher. Lived in Texas City. This is my youngest sister, also a teacher. Everybody went into the teaching profession. My dad thought highly of education, and she resides in Austin. So that's the end of the story.
That was great.
Thank you for
So
being patient.
interesting.
Wasn't that fascinating? And he told us the first time I heard him, and he just
That was
But like
so
it-
interesting about your dad and
yes.
also the history around here and how he
And
tied into that
thankful, and what I-
history.
That's what I grew up with, and this is the original manuscript before I, got it published. I did this for the grandkids so that nobody's read it yet. But anyway, it's there.
And you You have volume 1 and volume 2?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon in 2 volumes. I'm not worried about anybody buying it. I mean, I don't do books to get rich. You never do that.
No,
But I wanted the record done. And
yes.
I explained to you how I got drawn into this. Somebody had to do it. And it took me
Yes.
5 years of writing, so it doesn't happen. Did you sit through my Gillespie presentation?
I did.
That's going to be 3 volumes.
That's
I
gonna be
never thought it
amazing.
would be that big, but
Yeah.
I'm doing research and it's not the best English, it's not the best format, but I'll let other people take it and do it. I can't, some of the book companies I talked to them said, you know, get it down to 215 pages. I said, I can't do 215 pages. Look at all the stuff you're leaving out. So I have everything documented. Everything in these books is documented with, I don't know, I had 400 footnotes in some chapters. I dove deep into the resources to find this chapter has only 114. I must have been slacking out. I love doing research. I love diving into things and finding things out. And I'm sorry I didn't catch that other thing. That really bugs me that I didn't do that. Anyway, thank you for those nice comments.
Pleasure.
So your dad came to the United States in what year?
1914,
1914. And he
1917.
couldn't speak English?
Not a word. He knew French, he knew Spanish, and he knew Italian. He just never learned English until he had to.
But then he becomes a leader, he learns the English, becomes a leader in the town and the
Yeah.
county.
Yeah, and
I
went
don't
on
know if
from there.
anybody ever becomes a leader in this community, but he was elected office.
It's amazing to
Yeah.
look at those numbers and names and know those people, the familial name of those people from so long ago, and to recognize the names of the people that established the town and were elected, and, you know, just amazing.
Being in politics, being an elected official in the 20s and 30s in town was significant. Then it grew, it got bigger. I don't think it matters so much now when you sit on the city council.
Yeah.
Um,
No, it doesn't have the same
No,
feel.
it's not
No,
quite the
people
same.
don't really,
Elections were important.
Yes,
People,
they were.
They
They
showed
were.
up and they grilled people.
Yep.
Those school closing,
Yep, yep.
that was trial by fire. And my dad loved that, and I guess politicians loved that.
you know, they did.
But it was still hard for him. He had competition from the other man.
Oh, yeah, nobody's gonna give him a
Sure,
award.
right.
It wasn't just given to him.
No,
He
no.
earned it.
My brother defeated a candidate, somebody in office to get justice of the peace, and then he defeated somebody to run for county attorney, and then nobody ran against him for the next 20 years. He was too popular. My brother was the opposite of me. He was outgoing. People just had a lot of fun with him, and
Someday you will have
he
to,
never made people mad.
And he
someday you will
was
have to tell
lucky.
again what you've done with your life, because it's an amazing story. We got to hear that last time. An amazing story,
Yeah, who would have thought? I would have never could have planned this out like that.
just amazing.
Just lucky.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they could have gone the other way.
Mark, we have a couple people who responded in chat, and they said, Ross Bigelow said, wonderful family stories. Enjoyed it a lot, thanks. And Judith Gibbs said, very interesting, thanks.
Thank you.
Just to let you know some of the chats.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
The book's available at the library if you want to check it out. It's not light reading.
Is it the only copy you have here on the table?
That I brought.
Do you have some more at home?
Yeah, I bought a few more to give away.
Well,
This is the
I would-
reprint
I
that
would
I
like
had
to
done with
purchase
Amazon.
volume 1 and 2.
Huh?
I would like to purchase volume 1 and 2.
Okay, you can go online if you like, and to Google it there. I can send you to mine.
Did you show anybody what they look like?
I think you took a look at it, yeah.
So what kind of peaches are tasty, that taste good? I bought peaches at the stands not your stand, but
That's the first one.
down by the movie theater. But they don't taste like anything.
The big green. Funny thing about a peach is it has to ripen on the tree,
Yeah,
and the sugar content has to build up.
yeah, I just found that out.
I was just gonna show them what the books look like.
Yes, that's
This is
volume
volume
one.
one.
Uh-huh.
Put it up, you can see it okay there. And this is volume two.
It didn't show up.
No, it's on there.
Oh, it, okay.
This is how big they are.
And it's little writing, so there's a lot of words.
It's not, yeah,
Yeah, I had to use real small print.
it'll take you more than a
Because-
weekend to read it.
The letterheads,
Uh-huh.
I actually copied those so that they would be in a letter form. And that's why I was so enthralled with the letterheads that he used. I've reproduced all of those. So they're all in there. Because I just felt like that was part of it. Well, this is one I just cut out, so they're all usually with the letter. And he was enamored with letterheads, which was, I appreciated. That was fun.
I can't recall, you speak several languages,
I just learned English.
just
I
English.
grew up speaking German. Can't tell.
You know, it's amazing,
I've never learned a foreign language.
Yeah.
I tried. I can't do Spanish. I'm sorry.
but you can read the script and taught yourself how to write it
Yeah,
and
I can still write it.
somebody else.
They don't teach that anymore.
No, where, I
That's kind of
know.
sad.
I know.
It's really pretty. I've got several letters that show the script on the
Just
letter.
amazing,
It's like,
just wonderful.
Were these in your presentation
Yeah.
also?
I brought them along to show them the script, what it
Yeah.
looks like. These are copies that I found in my sister's things.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that just amazing?
All the original letters are at A&M in San Antonio in their archives.
I want to copy that inside volume one.
I turned over a lot of this gavel. I turned over a lot of personal things. Figuring if anybody ever does any research, it's there. And
Where do you store these? I mean, do you store them where?
all the original documents are in San Antonio at the University of A&M,
Okay,
San Antonio, in their
yeah,
archives.
as they should be someplace that they're safe.
I just wish he had kept his mom's letters.
Oh my God, I wonder why.
Why did your mom burn the things?
I don't know.
She just
Something they were gone.
didn't want to
I don't know.
remember, or?
Or I asked.
I'm
them.
kind of at that age now, so there's no point in keeping this. I'll burn it and get rid of it.
Don't do that. I don't do that. My
Um,
children will say, where's all this junk coming from?
She just didn't realize that.
No, but what a treasure.
Well, yeah. I regret that she did that. I wish I could have stopped her, but you know, everybody has their own reasons. But they would have been, what a compliment they would have been
Yes,
if I could. And there were more than that one letter from Cuba that got destroyed. So he was writing quite frequently to her. And I didn't mention, my mother said he was a good dancer. And I only saw him dance twice, both at the weddings of my sisters.
yeah.
But I don't know why. There were dance halls all over the county. He never went. And when his brother showed up and did go, it was like embarrassing. Don't do that. And I kind of understand that because that's the way my brother treated me. He was back from law school. He was running for office. What's his little kid brother going to do to embarrass him? I felt that. And in many ways, it estranged us from having a real brother relationship. It wasn't until he had cancer that finally able to keep that. Kind of sad.
You know, when he was telling one of his stories about when he would come home from school and his mom had been making jelly. And he said he would walk in the door and smell it and he could lick the spoon or the beer or whatever. And it just made me remember my grandmother. And when we used to go, their peach tree on their farm up in the Panhandle. And we would go down to visit her on Sunday after church, and we, just to smell that, you smell it and taste it when you were
She would
telling
call
the
me to the
story.
back steps. And I made a little statue that's out at the peach house of me sitting on the steps,
Yes,
eating out of that same
yes,
pot,
Yes, yes,
that same jelly pot.
yes.
Back to your question about peaches. Peaches have to ripen on the tree. If you pick them, they stop ripening. That's not true with apples and pears. You can pick an apple that tastes kind of not tart, just not ripe, and set it in your kitchen, and that starch will turn to sugar and get sweeter, and then it'll of course decay. But peaches have to be picked ripe, or they never get flavor. Period. And most people pick them too soon, so they can carry them 100 miles, and they have a tough skin. A peach, I think the Spanish word is durazno for a peach, which literally means a fruit that doesn't keep. In other words, a peach is completely ripe when it collapses. Rejection just collapses. That's when the highest sugar content is. And that can happen away on the tree. And people need to get the peaches to market, so they pick them firm, and they're all underripe.
Yeah, they don't taste like anything. Just
The
no
explanation for when they, how many days of frost and how many, when they know frost is coming and they put their heat in, wow, how does all that work?
Well, you only have to worry about that if they're in full bloom. Bud state, we're not in buds yet. I have a few varieties that are in bud, but when they're in bloom, they become very fragile. If the temperature drops to 26, they'll freeze and kill the flower. Okay, we have a huge fan in our
Right.
orchard that we're going to move to the new block, and it will keep air moving
Circulate.
and hopefully bring in some warmer air, but to keep it moving when it's critical. And it's only for a few hours that can kill that peach. The cold weather we've been having right now doesn't hurt at all. It can drop back down. 0 might do some damage now, like it did last year. But they need so many hours of cold, and that's not an exact science. Every peach, when they're developed, they watch to see how long from bloom to ripening, or how many hours of cold are recorded before it blooms. And they determine that certain peaches need 600 hours of temperatures between 45 and 35. It's a guesswork. We have enough right now. Sometimes there's carryover hours from really cold years. Supposedly hours below 32 to 0 don't count. And so they don't know, but they have a general idea of how many hours. So when you buy a tree here at Walmart, make sure it's the right variety. It might bloom after 300 hours, and that tree should be sold in the valley, which 300 hours would be usually pretty quick.
And so
We're a little over 600 hours right now, so we're looking really, really good.
So what would be the good month to come by your store and buy a peach?
We generally open about mid-May, and we run through August. We have different varieties that ripen. Mid-June, all through July is peak season.
Yeah, get rid of
They're all good.
You can put them in the backyard where you have that opening. So where you can see,
Oh,
that would
yeah,
be beautiful.
behind me used to be a peach orchard. I lived in Heritage,
Oh, okay.
That
Gated community.
gated
yeah.
community
Yeah, we
for
both-
older people.
yeah, we both do.
In my backyard
Is
used to
that right
be,
over here?
yeah,
Yeah,
I did a morning talk there
really?
in January.
Oh,
There were
really?
like a dozen women at the
I didn't even
clubhouse.
know that.
That's the first time first time ever asked to talk in Fredericksburg about our company.
Oh, really?
Suddenly I had 3 more.
oh, we're going.
So now I'm through.
Yeah, we both live over there.
This is the first time I've been to this
Ollie.
she just brought me for the first time.
We're in the
No,
same
this
book
was-
club, so
We're in the same book club.
so we were talking about a book and got the catalog out. And I said,
So I'm
oh,
so, yeah, we got the
and
catalog
she's a
out.
history buff also. So
So I'm so glad My first meeting coming here was your
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very kind
really
comments.
interesting.
Wonderful, dear. Appreciate you. And we'll just go riding on the tractor next, tractor riding in the feature.
And I like your newspaper article about the
Oh, yeah.
foods.
Yeah.
We're supposed to take turns, but I think I'm doing more than Mr. Fisher is. It takes about 2 days to do. I love doing the research.
Oh,
It's a lot of fun, but it takes me about,
people look for those.
2
They look
days.
for those articles.
So this was your land where you have your little peach
You still
stand?
have her on
Is that
there.
correct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
who's
need to-
the other man that's with you in the newspaper?
I'm bringing her
that's
down.
Mr. Fisher.
But who is it? Is it your cousin or
Oh, that's another
your
story.
friend or?
You can take this. When I got a job teaching here, I hired Chase Fisher to help me fresh agaritas. And that was his freshman year in high school, and he went to work for me that summer. And he became my son.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
You know, but never had, I'm gonna sit down and get there. I knew I would never have kids on my own.
Well, I'm not from here. I'm from
Yeah.
Arizona, so.